Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We'll be getting started in a moment. First, I'd like to go over a couple housekeeping items. We're recording today's webinar, and we'll be making that available to you tomorrow morning just in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with any of your colleagues. If you have any questions over the course of the presentation, please put them in the questions panel in your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll be sure to answer them after the demonstration. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our presenters today. Brett Dorr will be kicking things off with our session. Brett is our Director of Solutions Engineering here at Virtru and brings more than 20 years of experience working with enterprise customers in information security, data management, and data privacy. We're also very honored to have with us Ken Kurz, Vice President of Information Technology and Chief Information Officer for Corporate Office Properties Trust, also known as COPT. Formerly the CISO at the University of Oklahoma, Ken led OU's network, operations engineering, risk and governance, identity and access management, and security operations teams. He spent over 7 years at the DoD in leadership roles working on the development of information security capabilities, security architectures and strategies, risk mitigation, and remediation. His final position was as a head of National Cryptographic Solutions Management Office, responsible for the development of national cryptographic strategy, algorithm management, and associated capability roadmaps. Today, Brett and Ken will be providing some need-to-know details on how you can overcome the limitations of portal-based email encryption and succeed with end-to-end email protection. Okay, I think we're all set. Take it away, Brett.
Hey, thank you so much, Emily, and thanks so much to Ken for joining us today. Really an honor to have Ken here. So we're going to open up the presentation with just stepping back a second and talk about really the enterprise needs as it comes to email protection, and then compare and contrast those options as we think about how applying this technology inside of our enterprise. Are we really meeting the standards or the applications that we're driving to from a security and IT perspective? So I want to start off the presentation with really digging into a little bit around the needs for additional protection of our email environment. So this is a survey done by EMA around 150 security and IT professionals around the needs for additional data protection around this environment. So being the 25th, today, any folks that are familiar with or have data regarding to European data, the highly regulated space specific to GDPR is well and true to everyone's hearts right now, because that is a regulatory need that we traditionally associate with data protection. Here in the US, we have healthcare with HIPAA, PCI data, all of these different areas, and that makes up that highly regulated space. But an interesting result from this survey was another CISO from a company that specifically uses stem cells to manufacture genetically modified meat, which is very different, right? So they don't have the traditional HIPAA data. They're dealing with stem cells. They're dealing with animals, cows and pigs around that. That's not PCI around that. But as we started speaking to this CISO, we learned that there were other considerations above and beyond regulation that would be just broadly categorized as sensitive. So sensitive data to this organization was specific elements of their product and sharing DNA, or how they're targeting different products to meet the market demands, specific launch plans that are associated with those, legal communication, executive communication, as we would have this. From an IT perspective, how do I effectively communicate passwords and customer lists and going through this? So as we think about additional needs for data protection, specifically as it relates to the email world, the survey was very broad, upwards of 73% really applied to this, just not applicable to just regulatory needs, but generally across organizations as a whole. So this becomes important because today, as it has been for a long way, the easiest way for us to share information inside and outside of our organizations are email. So email is ubiquitous. Everybody has it. Most everybody right now probably has that email client open and maybe scanning that content for an important email that's coming in. So not surprisingly, a commonly sourced the most common source of data leaks within this environment has email. So upwards of 28% from this survey was where the most data leaks were happening. So interestingly, another stat not on this slide is almost half of these respondents had some sort of email encryption or solution in place, though it was still very highly regarded as the #1 source for data leaks within their environments. And really the story comes down to why their existing solutions have been ineffective. So as we look at this, as we look at the potential loss of data within these environments, the #1, the theme that came through over half the time was our existing solutions are very difficult to use. One CISO in the environment or in the survey specifically said, hey, we have implemented and evaluated 3 email encryption providers over the last 5 years, but at the end of the day, people weren't using them. The user experience was very difficult. It was almost bad for morale. People were trying to get around using this information as we have this. So the ease of use is the inhibitor for the adoption of this technology as we have this. So as we think about data protection within our environments, it's not just the cryptography and the systems that are in place and where the keys are managed and the ciphertext. We really have to think above and beyond about the user experience that drives the adoption for this. So as we identify this high amount of information, that's 73% in the survey, it may be a little higher or a little lower for your organization. It may be very highly regulated. It may be just highly sensitive. We want to explore the different options that are available for us specific to the areas of encryption. So now we'd like to contrast some of the potential legacy approaches or maybe what some technologies that you may implement today within this. So I'd like to break down a few of the options that are available to us today in the encryption landscape. So encryption, very broad term, we're using cryptography to protect information so that only authorized parties should be able to access this content. But we can apply this in various places. And the first and foremost place that this technology should always be applied, if possible, is from the server to server communication basis. So this is where we'll use terminology like SSL or TLS. This is protecting the connections between our mail servers, our clients and our mail servers from each other. So if I were to send an email from my G Suite domain to Ken on his Microsoft domain, I can guarantee that those communication, that stream, is protected in transit. So anybody that's trying to listen to that communication, they wouldn't be able to handle that because that would be ciphertext as we have that. But the downside of this approach, if we're relying this on 100% of our protection of our email environment, is the individual emails and attachments themselves are not protected. They're protected in transit with the stream, but we have no guarantees on how they're stored protected, who has access beyond these environments as we're going through this. So while effective in preventing snooping of email communications, it really is not offering you additional layers of protection that may be required from a regulatory standpoint, but more importantly, from a sensitive standpoint, how do I control information around that? So this is why organizations are exploring options above and beyond TLS-based encryption. And the next common approach is a portal-based approach. So this is a very broad category. There are many vendors out there that are providing this type of approach. But the idea is I have some sort of server in between, an MTA gateway, SMTP servers that are intercepting my messages that are deemed sensitive, many times by a subject line, like encrypt, as we have that. And then from there, we identify, hey, the recipient needs to go access this email from a portal. So we'll upload this email message to the portal, and then from there, they'll have to go create credentials and go retrieve this. You probably have either implemented this, but almost guaranteed you've received one of these types of messages. And probably you've forgotten your password because you don't receive these types of messages very often. So this is somewhat of a black box, both from the sender's perspective, but from a recipient experience, you're requiring separate accounts and passwords as we have this. So there are definitely downsides for this, but there are additional layers of protection that at least are offered with this approach above and beyond just simple TLS-based approaches. So the third variety of encryption that we're going to talk a little bit more about is the concept of end-to-end encryption. So instead of having a black box in the middle that may or may not be picking up messages, you're actually encrypting before it ever hits your mail servers, and only authorized recipients are able to handle this content. So as I communicate with Ken, through those messages, my email is encrypted directly before I hit that send button, and then Ken will receive that and decrypt it directly in that environment. So I can guarantee control of that information as I have audits for that. So as we're thinking about this, as we go through this, we really want to think about in the broadest picture that we have an email environment that we want to make very secure and very easy to use, and we want to make sure with our modern enterprise environments that we are focusing on the tenets on how to protect and a secure to use platform. So at the first and foremost, we need to make this an environment that our customers, our internal users, are not trying to bypass. And we do that, we need to think about the user experience, not only the cryptography, which is step 2. So in many cases, we like to focus on that user experience first, and then focus a little bit more on the end-to-end security and the control of those environments. Obviously, in highly regulated environments, those can be switched, but the argument can be made that user experience will come first. A third environment to definitely think about as we're thinking about our data protection and modern protection requirements, going back to that GDPR conversation, that we are introducing protection laws into our society that says we need to guarantee audit and access controls of our environments. And we need to consider this not only for external sharing, but also our internal systems. As we think about sharing internally confidential information, how do we do that? And we can't make this hard on the administrator either. So let's take these concepts of the email considerations as considerations for our environment and compare that to what we see on a regular basis for the portal-based encryption that we tend to replace a lot. The first one all comes down to that user experience. So user experience with a portal-based approach typically is a bit of a black box. So you are trusting something downstream to protect this content. You don't necessarily know if it was protected. You don't know what the rules are from a sender standpoint. You're introducing friction on your recipient because they're creating user IDs and passwords. So all of these things tend to allow users or force users to say, hey, I don't want to use this technology. So that's the last thing we want from an IT and security perspective. From a security standpoint, we're now introducing another vendor that we're trusting with our most sensitive content. What standards do they go through to protect your data? How are we ensuring that their controls are in place? Are we introducing a place that is a potential another attack vector that we need to go through? So while portals are indeed can provide a very secure environment for this, but why do I have to trust those? As we think about encryption keys also, what options do I have available to ensure that even those encryption keys that are being leveraged there, how do I ensure that those are being protected so that vendors do not have access to that content? So security, very, very important factor as we have this. The next is what are our abilities from an auditor standpoint, from an internal threat standpoint, to ensure that our most sensitive content is, number one, being protected, and also limit the accessibility of this content and prove who has access to this. So many of these things may be possible, they may be very difficult, they may be very hidden into the platform solution, all very critical components as we think about this overall. So number four, sorry, is the ability to protect internal communications. So as we think about some of the use cases that Virtue is being implemented for is going above and beyond security standards for our most secure content. So think about executive to board communications. Think about how I communicate. We're going through a merger and an acquisition associated with that. We are sharing sensitive contracts internally with this. So typically, this is not a place where you would put a portal-based solution because all of those emails sit on your mail system around that, allowing for protection of that communication, and authorization and access control can become a critical aspect depending on the sensitivity of the data and the control of that. And the final piece where these types of solutions tend to be failing or coming up short is the ability for administration. We typically find these to be in one of two areas: one, way too simple, or two, way too complex. So in both of those environments, we're not meeting the enterprise needs as they are from an administration capability in understanding and controlling the environment from a deployment standpoint, and building and configuring rules within that. So as we think about this, I'd love to have a little survey question on thoughts there before we transition our presentation here. So Emily, I'll hand it off to you for a second.
Yes, thank you. We're interested in knowing which of these challenges resonates most with you. It could be currently, or it could have been in previous experience, but which one of these hits home most? I'm just going to leave this for another moment, and then I'll share back the results. It'd be interesting to see what everybody picks here. All right, I'm going to close polls in about 5 seconds. And I'll share back the results. So it looks like user experience is actually the biggest pain point for this audience, which makes a lot of sense. As well as the security and trusting third parties being a challenge, and then the internal controls, not being able to prevent the internal sharing to unauthorized people. So thank you very much for taking that. I'll hand it back to Brett. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks so much, Em. So as we think about this, we want to differentiate and discuss how is Virtru applying our technology to, number one, focus on user experience. Number two, give you the ability to have that control environment and really overcome many of the shortcomings of that portal environment. So as we think about Virtru's technology, our biggest focus over the last 5 or 6 years is building technology that is very seamless and easy to use, but provide the ability to do this with end-to-end encryption. Typically a very difficult thing to do from a user experience standpoint, because there's key exchanges and going through that. So we have built and patented technologies that allow this to provide both a very seamless and easy to use experience. And this gives you the ability to audit and control and introduce the ability to control those environments that are above and beyond just simple encryption. So giving you the ability to have content management and access controls, a little DRM associated with those environments, but also enforced from an administration standpoint when and how this technology is used through data loss prevention rules, allowing you to understand and be visible to the access control patterns of your content. So there's a few different audiences that you always think of when we're dealing with this type of encryption technology. Many times the driver is the security folks that are worried about the protection of that sensitive or regulated content, but our IT administrators, our digital collaboration platform holders, those are the people that are implementing this. So we tend to operate in a world that's very mixed between those. So as we think about this, the best way to really understand this technology is to step through a quick demonstration. So why don't we do that now as we have this, and to help you understand or solidify these concepts overall. Okay. So as we think about Virtru's technology, I mentioned at the very beginning of that slide is we want a seamless user experience as it comes down. So we integrate very tightly into the most common cloud or email systems today. So I'm going to start with a G Suite environment, a very common environment for folks that have transitioned over to Google for that. Then I'll step into a Microsoft environment, whether it be Exchange or Office 365. because we have a broad set of customers that are in both environments. So you have to think about you're sharing sensitive information outside of your domains. So how do we protect and control that there? So I'll start the demonstration from a G Suite environment. So as we have this, protecting or adding virtue protection is as simple as flipping the switch on. In this case, the switch is provided by a browser extension that allows us to hook directly into the G Suite environment that protects the drafts of these emails, that as we look at this, as I introduce any specific attachments, those attachments are protected as well. And all of these are done by using Virtue's technology that has been open sourced, the trusted data format that protects every single email and every single attachment with separate encryption keys. And as I send this communication, the key to understand this is that any recipient should be able to decrypt this information. So they should be able to decrypt it whether they have Virtue installed or they don't. But the key to understand as we have this is leveraging end-to-end encryption. So as I go to my sent items and show you the email that was sent here and the attachment, what you'll see is a block of ciphertext. And that block of ciphertext represents that sensitive information that is really inaccessible by any party in between unless you give them access to those encryption keys. So that's a very important aspect from a security standpoint. So you can either have a few different user experiences. One, we'll jump into an Outlook experience here. We're on Outlook for Windows here. This was one of the recipients of that email message from I'm a Secure. And with our extensions that we build directly into Outlook, you have the ability to decrypt directly in line. So if I bring this up outside that preview window, I can see the decrypting. I'm an authorized party. I can just decrypt that automatically in line. And conversely, if I'm creating new messages, then our user experience will just have a Virtue on that allows them to do that. This can also be triggered by rule, as we have that as well. The other experience that I mentioned is this is end-to-end encryption, but as this is different from end-to-end encryption that you may be used to, like a PGP or an SMIME that requires a complex key exchange process and management process, is we are sending end-to-end encrypted messages to any parties. And the way that we can do that is we allow them to receive these encrypted messages. Again, this is the email that we had. The ciphertext is still in the email, but since they do not have a Virtue client installed, what we do is we present this view that allows them to say, here are the instructions of how to decrypt this message. Completely 100% customizable, the brands, the logos, the message here, all of this, because what they're going to do is we will allow for the decryption of this message in a very seamless manner. And what we'll allow them to do is all they need to do is prove who they are, prove their identity. We don't want them to have to create a new password, create a new identity. We want them to leverage their identity on their existing system. So since this user is on a Gmail account, we can just say, go log in with your Google account. Use OAuth to go do that. Very simple and straightforward there. So any system like an Office 365 or a G Suite provides a very seamless way through OAuth or SAML or OpenID to do this, which is fantastic and covers a broad range of users. That's not a hard and fast requirement, though, to receive an encrypted email. The send me an email flow allows us to authenticate those users as well in a very seamless manner using one-time passwords that are associated with those and through our authentication through that. But as we look through this and as we go view this document now we can see we're able to decrypt this message. So the similarities are we're showing this message in a browser like a portal would, but the very big difference of this is this message is being decrypted in this browser session. Virtue never has access to this content, nor is storing any of this unencrypted information on our systems. So they can go view the attachments, they can go handle those, and at all times, the user that sent this email has the ability to do, if they've sent this accidentally, or they forgot to set some of these controls that are in place, these can all be changed after the fact. So for instance, I can set things like expirations. I'll set an expiration on this email that'll expire in 1 week. Or if I accidentally included one of the recipients here, I can go hit the revoke button as the sender or as an administrator of this environment. So if we were to go try to access this message, within 60 seconds of that revoke button being pressed is when the encryption key is no longer accessible and access has been revoked, even if it was open at the time. So this gives you full control of those environments as we have. And even administratively, the final portion is we have a full dashboard environment that allows you as senders or as administrators to understand where your most sensitive content's going. If it's been forwarded, you have the ability to disable further forwarding or revoke access as administrators. But really, from a policies and procedures standpoint, you have the ability to set up rules on when this technology is applied. So you do not have to force users to click on that button. You can identify certain aspects of the email. So here's a Spanish identifier for a driver's or a ID number, a DNI. And if it's being sent externally, then I can set up rules to say automatically encrypt, disable forwarding, expire. All of those are rules that can be set up administratively. So this gives you really fine-grained controls that allow you to target rules and policies and procedures above and beyond just end-to-end encryption. Now what we're giving the capability to do is scope rules based off of the users that we're setting and when and how to apply our data protection technologies. So as we think about this technology and as it's in place today, really I would love to take a little bit of time and talk about specific use cases as they would be applied by introducing Ken. So Ken, thank you so much for spending a little time in your afternoon with us. Before we dive into the conversation here, would love to hear a little bit more about COPT and as an organization, and give us a little bit background on the organization.
Okay, all right, thanks Brett, appreciate the invite to be here. So COPT is a $5 billion real estate investment trust headquartered in between Baltimore and DC here in Columbia, Maryland. We acquire, develop, also manage about 156 or so Class A office space properties, a little over 17 million square feet. Most of that is near key defense installations. A lot of our focus is on doing business with the government or entities supporting doing work for the government, as well as a portion of the portfolio is dedicated to urban sort of high-rise properties in Baltimore and DC, and then we also have a data center component to the portfolio as well.
So those are some staggering numbers as I step back and think about both the numbers and going through that. You know, from a security standpoint, I can envision lots of sensitive information. Love to hear the types of information that you would look to add additional layers of protection on and who you're communicating with.
Sure. Well, from my perspective, you know, coming into the company a little over 2 years ago and looking around, I mean, in a lot of ways, COPT is no different than really any other similar company or pick another industry. I came from higher ed. I worked in nonprofit. Many of the same problems and challenges where, you know, you have personal identifiable information, HR sending W-2s around. Due to work with the government, we have folks doing background checks and passing clearance info. There's sensitive data around workers' comps claims when you hire new employees. So a lot of very sort of traditional things that are out there need to be protected. More specific to COPT, we're a publicly traded company. So even in some of the examples that you had in the demo and earlier in the presentation, information and data around financials before they're, say, filed with the SEC, before we do hold earnings calls, those conversations, both internal and with members of our committees and board, are all very sensitive. From a property perspective, we have, again, some sensitive locations, not necessarily even the locations themselves, but how the buildings are laid out and who's in what facilities. So I think there's sort of a broad spectrum of things that, just looking at them at face value don't seem very valuable, but as part of a larger sort of aggregation effort on the part of any sort of determined adversary, we also play a part in that, and we owe it to our tenants and customers to protect it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting perspective that we're hearing a lot more around your stewardship of your customers and your tenant data and the data overall. So that's a really great perspective on that. So as you evaluate and have had experience with other data protection and encryption solutions, would love to hear a little bit about your perspective on maybe where some of those have fallen short from your approach, where you would look to apply a different approach as it's concerned around data protection.
Okay, so over in years past, have worked to sort of either implement PGP or, when Norton got involved with their enterprise solution a number of years ago, tried to deploy that at a, we'll call it an enterprise level, and not even a very large organization. And it had nothing but challenges and problems, many for the reasons that you already brought up, where, ease of use, ease of administration, the technology itself, doing key exchange and protecting the messages, really there's challenges there in understanding, is it truly an end-to-end solution, or are you just doing something in transit? And so, from my perspective, a lot of them were sort of not half-baked, but they really didn't provide, again, that end-to-end solution. And the workforce was never really that interested, just because it was difficult, or it was clunky, or it would crash Outlook or crash their application. And it was easier for them to just bypass it or ask for it to be uninstalled. And we could never really get the buy-in that we were looking for. And even specific to COPT, as we were starting to look around again, is that we're a real estate and primarily an accounting company, right? That's where aside from property management, and we're not a tech company, and so we couldn't have sort of high expectations for something being complex and getting any sort of buy-in.
Yeah, it really speaks to a lot of the conversations I have, even in even more technical situations where you really have a desire and a need for end-to-end encryption. But at the end of the day, we're not cryptographers. We're not computer scientists that we're servicing. We're servicing people that are just trying to do their day job, but be conscious of around that and going through that. So I'd love to hear a little bit, for the audience about your evaluation process. You spoke around evaluating and some of the PGP technology and some of the areas with that. Would love to hear about how you went out and did research and looked for companies, and how you chose ultimately selected Virtu's technology.
Yeah, so just again through experience working different places, seen various different implementations attempting to do secure email. More specific to COPT, we had gone down the path of sort of a full-blown Office 365 implementation, and then started looking at secure email again as part of that. And there are some capabilities with some additional licensing of Microsoft where they claim it's capable, it's easy to integrate, and so on. Did have some personal experience using Virtu with some colleagues in your very early days when it was sort of limited to Gmail, and it was even signed up just for a free account, and just found it so easy to use inside of Chrome that it was one of those things I always kept in the back of my mind, waiting for the Outlook integration, which came here a few years ago. And to me, that almost seemed that was our first place to start. It was almost if Virtu couldn't do it, then we would go look at something else. And it was very easy to implement. We had one or two trainings internally, once we headed down that path, and we really didn't even need to have those. And it has really been a successful capability for us going forward.
That's fantastic to hear. We always love to hear positive experience, especially when we're introducing additional layers of security inside of an environment that a lot of times aren't associated with ease of use. So we went through a few of the features and the functionalities just in the brief demonstration that we did. Out of curiosity, what tends to be the features that you all use the most today of the Virtu solution, both from a user experience as well as administratively?
Well, let's see. I could say that just primarily the fact that it provides a secure email capability unto itself is huge for us. I know anecdotally, one of the features that's used often is disable forwarding, right? Is that you're having a sensitive conversation with somebody, either internal or external to the organization, and want to ensure that they don't pass that along. We've used that a couple of times with like our external audit team, just to sort of make sure that those emails and so on don't end up anywhere that they're not supposed to. Securing sort of the exchange of security documentation, bank information, board executive leadership discussions, internal and external. I hopped in the admin panel just to check, see what the kind of subject lines were appearing. I mean, there's some stuff in there with respect to exchanges of discussions with potential investors. From an IT perspective, we use it to, if we don't have somebody local and in-house where we're bringing them on board, we use Virtru to pass their credentials, versus sort of one of the old ways, right, where you'd send one email that had the username and another email with the password, thinking that that was some sort of secure way of doing it. And then we've even gotten a little bit creative in that we've used it from a read receipt perspective, where we were having trouble with an outside vendor and use Virtru, where we encrypted the message and send it to it when we weren't getting a response, and we're able to verify that they did indeed open the email and they did indeed read what we put in there. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there for both the sort of traditional and creative use for the capability.
Yeah, those are definitely some interesting ones that are definitely sometimes considered edge cases, but sometimes considered critical to an organization when you're sharing data and understanding if it's been accessed or not, or if you accidentally go through and send an email to a wrong person, and proving accessibility can be a really important and impactful thing, both from a business and a compliance standpoint. So I was at a conference yesterday, local here to Colorado, with a lot of our government customers there, and really I got one of the best compliments that I could get from one of our customers right down the road from us. Was a security and IT professional in a city and county seat, was really talking about user experience, and his best experience with Virtru is that he hasn't heard anything about it. It's just working within their environment, and he knows he's getting the protection he needs. I'd love to hear from your perspective how it's been a fit for the business. We talked about a broad set of use cases, from accounting to legal to IT. What's been the response internally overall to the solution?
I'd say very much the same, right? I was actually very surprised going into the administrative side of things to see the number of people using it. And we've never heard anything about it, never had any real problems with it. I think what has really made us realize is that people are probably more security conscious than we give them credit for. And given an easy to use capability, just literally hit the button, they'll do it. And, when we started this conversation about the business case and doing the webinar, I mean, that really started through our CFO, who, really surprised me. And it's like, oh yeah, I use it all the time. And so, yeah, it being as easy to use as it is. And the other thing I would add, particularly because of the work that we do with the government, one of the things I was pleasantly surprised by was the compatibility on their end, right? If you're sending messages, we're somewhat less restrictive in the types of things that we can do and the flexibility we have within our infrastructure. Sending and exchanging information inside that environment on the federal side, they had no problem using Virtru within the web browsers and so on, especially with all the restrictions that are placed around what they can and can't do on those machines. And so that made for a huge win with respect to the government services side of what we do here at COPT, and made it very easy for us.
Yeah, and that's a really challenging problem to solve as a software vendor. So that is fantastic feedback, because it is a difficult thing. We obviously do not want to bypass the security and controls in place with our most sensitive data around that, and as we have that. So I guess to wrap up, I'd love to folks, as you're thinking about different questions, feel free to type those into the question panels here. Would love to know any audience questions that you all may have for Ken or myself as we have this. But to wrap up, would love, Ken, your advice for the audience here attending today or maybe watching the recording that may be implementing or considering portal-based or on this today. Any advice that you may have in potentially making the leap over to Virtru?
I mean, I would offer up to people, try the free side, right? Get a demo, try with a small group. We did it internal to IT to start off with, and again, found how easy it was to use. Even when we ran into some challenges with, we use Okta for single sign-on and some identity management components there. The Virtru team was awesome in helping us to work through those challenges and make sure that it worked between that and Office 365. We even haven't gone down the path of really using the DLP components. I mean, we'll get there eventually, but I think that there's some great capabilities there that can also, provide what they're looking for in those portal-based solutions. And the other thing I would offer up too is that sort of the end-to-end component of what Virtru offers, end-to-end encrypting is really part of our cloud security strategy, right? So people focus on, well, I'm putting all my data up in Microsoft or in Google Apps or so on. Virtru gives us another layer of control and visibility into what's happening with our sensitive data in those environments that I can't get directly from Office 365. So I'd say consider, looking at the capability in that way too.
So that's fantastic advice. And number one, thank you so much for spending a little time out of your day to help folks understand your journey with Virtru. And really, it is an honor of ours to be able to help protect your most sensitive information. That really, for me, it really brings home the message of Virtru is we want to help you be more secure in your environment and provide a layer of security that just isn't available today with other platforms and solutions. So again, thank you for your time, and really, as I mentioned, would love to hear any audience questions that may have for Ken that we may have missed overall within this. So I'd love to close off the presentation section of this before we jump into Q&A with just a quick checklist of things to consider and really bring home the ideas as you're considering introducing additional security into your email environment. And really, I think we've really brought it home between myself and Ken and survey results, but consider that user experience. We want to create an environment that people will use. Is it as simple as flipping on a button? Do they know when and why they're protecting or using that environment? And allowing them to do this with end-to-end security. You don't need to introduce an environment that is sacrificing the control of that sensitive data within the environment, and giving you as administrators the ability to audit and access and understand the control, those read receipts that Ken mentioned as we're sharing the sensitive information, maybe not even getting a response on, as we explore potential use of DLP controls of those environments as we have that. And this doesn't have to be limited to external sharing use cases. So as we're thinking about this, as we're preparing for SEC filings, as we're sharing internal documents that need just that additional layer of protection, there are many internal use cases for internal sharing and control within this environment that we have to put in place. And we do not want to get in your way. We don't want to have to create an environment that forces you to bring up PowerShell and switch all your MTA routes and going through this. We want to give you a very easy administrative experience that gives you the full power and control of the end-to-end security in a very easy to use manner. So really, this is the focus of Virtru's technology and our time together. And now what we'll do is we'll open it up for any questions from the audience. So I'll hand it off back to Emily.
Great. Thank you so much, Brett and Ken. That was amazing. First question, how well does Virtru work with exchange journals and discovery for legal?
Yeah, I'll jump in at first with that. I don't know, Ken, if you're having any specific exchange journals there, but for us, with exchange journals, we actually offer a couple different capabilities, and it really depends on the requirements that you may have. We do offer technology that will decrypt content into those journals so that they will be decrypted into the journal, you can do that. That tends to be a lot of folks that are dealing with regular journal queries for SEC compliance and going through that. So we can decrypt into those. Another option is some folks want to make sure that those journals have that additional layer of protection as well. So we offer bulk decryption tool sets within their environment as we go within that.
Great, thank you. I've got another question here. I understand that Google is discontinuing its support for Google message encryption from Zix. How do you differ from Zix?
Oh, that is a great question. So yeah, Google has historically, from their Postini days, had an offering that Google customers would know as GAME, or Google Apps Message Encryption, but this was technology that was provided by a traditional portal vendor in Zix. And really the differentiation for us and the reason we're Google's recommended partner for encryption is that we allow for end-to-end encryption in a very seamless manner. So the Google Apps Message Encryption was typically triggered by a subject line, and that was the force of that, as we have that in the recipient experience involved user IDs and passwords. Really, as Google's recommended partner, we provide both the end-to-end encryption technology, but also there's use cases where we'll partner with Google to make sure that data that needs that additional layer of protection from a regulatory compliance standpoint can be stored on Google with that additional layers of protection. So really, the theme of this whole webinar around our differentiators between ease of use and auditability and security and user experience really applies to that solution that Google has retired.
Okay, great, thank you. Where are Virtue's keys hosted?
Yeah, that's a great question, because encryption keys in many instances are just as important as the encrypted content itself. In this case, we host our encryption keys, and really they're not our encryption keys, they're your encryption keys in one of two places. With our default software as a service offering, we leverage data centers in the US East and West through Amazon to store those encryption keys. But under certain instances, we have customers that need additional protection on those keys and to fully control those environments. So we also have an offering for those customers that allow them to host their own key servers to protect those encryption keys themselves. So the customer gets to choose the location and the protection of those keys.
Excellent. I've got another question here that Brett, I mean, you can answer, but I think as well, maybe Ken may have a use case that he can give us, possibly. Can an administrator revoke messages on behalf of users?
Yes, very simple, right? You go into the admin panel and find the message and hit revoke.
Yeah, and that's an important functionality there, because the encryption keys are owned by the organization. So as an administrator for COP, Ken has the ability to do that in his admin panel selectively or within that. So that's a very important feature there. And that can be in the case, we've had some instances where there's potential insider threat or just the accidental sends, those types of things that administratively Virtue offers the capability to do.
Great. How does Virtue compare to platforms like Proofpoint?
Great question, Ken. I'd be curious on your perspective on how we compare to, you mentioned another one there with the Microsoft offerings with RMS. Proofpoint does some similar things. Love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, so the organization I came from, the Health Science Center piece of it was using Proofpoint and wanted to push that down onto the main campus. And one of the reasons we pushed back was sheer expense, right? And as one, and the sort of the complexity of the deployment, I think, as you were mentioning in your wrap up, the changes that need to be made to the system and the redirection of mail and so on, and all that comes along with that sort of portal-based capability versus what Virtue offers in ease of administration and setup and execution. I mean, it's just to me is kind of a no-brainer. If you're looking for the capabilities, whether it be the DLP components of it, in addition to just the secure email. Again, cost, ease of use, ease of implementation was pretty simple from my perspective.
Yeah, and in some instances for very large organizations, we'll use to be complementing Proofpoint as well. So Proofpoint obviously does a lot more from their threat and attack prevention as we have that. So in some instances, will be used in conjunction with those, but customers with Virtu's ease of use from a product standpoint, from a user experience standpoint, will elect to use our DLP and encryption technology, and then use Proofpoint for some things that Proofpoint's fantastic at, including threat and protection that they may have within their overall stack.
Yeah, and I think I would add that's a great point, because we're for what it is that we do, and what, you know, as it complements all the other capabilities that we have in our security architecture, Virtu, to me, is it does what it says it's going to do, and that's what we needed. We didn't need the Cadillac with all the options and everything else, right? We're sort of satisfied with the other pieces and parts, and for what COPS use and the business case we talked about, it was the best solution for us.
Excellent, thank you. Questions are winding down a bit. What I'm going to do is I just have one more poll. We're very interested in finding out how relevant this talk has been for your organization. So if everyone can just take a moment, let us know. And in the meantime, if you have any other questions while we've got Ken and Brett on, please leave them in the questions box, and we'll check before we wrap up here. Okay, I'll leave this up for just a couple more seconds. Okay, and I'll share this back. Well, that's great. Very relevant. This is great. Thank you. So I'm just going to go back and check out and it looks like we're still wrapped up for questions. So we are all done. Just want to thank everybody for your time and attention, and for the great questions. And thank you, Brett and Ken. Fantastic. We will be sending out this recording to everybody first thing tomorrow, in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with any of your colleagues. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day, guys.